Hey everybody, my name is Mason Drum. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that intro. I had a ton of fun making it. Big shout out to Ryan Parker for helping with making that music. And also a big shout out to the lens rentals. That intro wouldn't have been possible without having a really specific lens. There's a macro lens to try to get that really shallow and close-up depth of field look, but also at a wide angle. And that's exactly what this Laowa 24mm probe lens allows you to do. If you ever need a specific lens that you are looking for, but you don't want to buy it, you can rent it, and rent it at lensrentals.com. They have great customer service, and there's a 15% off discount code in the description below, so check that out. But we're here really to talk about making HYRULE. I love Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It is a game that I've put hundreds of hours in, both me and my wife, and I wanted to kind of make a tribute to it. So I hadn't seen a topographical map made of HYRULE, and that's what I set out to do. Here's how I did it. Hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching. So I definitely did this the hard way. I know it would have been easier to laser cut or CNC all this, but I wanted to do it by hand. So what I ended up doing was I started with projecting an image onto a wall or onto a piece of paper, and then using that image to transfer all the topography onto pieces of foam board. So once I had the pieces of foam board, I essentially had the map as I wanted it, and then I used those pieces to stencil the design of each layer and all the pieces onto a piece of 1/4-inch plywood. And from there, it was just a long process of cutting out the map, cutting out the pieces of topography, and then routing out the rivers and lakes. So once you route something, there's no going back, and so to make sure that I maintained accurate scale and proportions with all of the rivers and lakes, I use transfer paper. So a little bit hard to explain, but any layer that was above the initial base layer and had water or lava, I had to pour first, and that was because a lot of the layers there was waterfalls and stuff, so the resin pour extended over the edge of the actual topography, and so once it hardened, I was able to then cut through the layer, and you'll see that in a little bit, some of the waterfalls and some of the volcano has lava that looks to run over the edge, and so that's why I had to pour it first. Right now what you're seeing is the second pour, where I did all the rivers and lakes, and this was my first time, or I guess technically second time. This project was the first time that I used epoxy or resin, so it was a learning experience for sure. At this point, I was concerned that I did not buy enough epoxy, and I was nervous that I was going to run out before I finished any of the rivers and lakes. And the way that I did it first, I have the oceans on the side that take up a lot more epoxy, and then the all the rivers and lakes, presumably take up less. And so I fortunately had enough just for the rivers and lakes, and so a day or two later, I had to go find some more and pour it. And you can see the discrepancy between that colored water and then the water on the rivers and lakes. So one of them, they're not the same shades, and that's just because I didn't have the same amount of pigments to put in to pour in the resin. And so that was kind of a bummer. It ended up not looking too bad. That looks pretty cool. And this is the resin partly hardened after about 20 hours. And then I waited 72 hours from the pour and then started sanding. And I had to go through a lot of different sanding techniques to get this down because I overpoured on a lot of it. This was probably the most time-consuming part of the whole project. Just sanding down all of the hardened epoxy. It was super annoying. So so it took 2 days to get the layers to where I wanted it to be. And I must have not mixed some of the epoxy well enough, because there were some very tacky areas even 4 or 5 days after the pour. And so yeah, I think that was just me not mixing it well. And so with all the pieces cut, I was able to begin gluing down the topography. And what you're seeing right now is you know what, this was probably the most time-consuming process, part of the whole thing. So there's 4 steps to this. I had to place pieces in the correct location. I had to glue it down, then nail it down in place, and where the nail's hidden. And then I sanded down the exterior with veneer, which is what you're seeing now. And so I had to repeat that about 115 times, because that's how many pieces there were. And it was very time consuming, and this is the finished product, and I really love the way it looked without stain. So after much debate, talking with my friends, my dad, my wife, I did decide to go ahead and make it a colored topography map. And so yes, you can find green stain. We had green stain, white stain, and then like a yellowish red stain that I used for some of the deserts and canyons. So our shop's table saw is currently out of order. At least it was out of order whenever we were working on this project. So we went to a nearby fabrication lab at the University of Oklahoma. It's a great resource. I didn't give myself much margin for error when initially placing the pieces on the 3/4 inch base, so I had my dad, who is the expert, make sure that the cuts were square. I really didn't want to mess that up. And here is the final piece, all cut. Ultimately, I really didn't like the look of the stain. It was just like really saturated and kind of looked cartoony. So I sanded down all the edges, and then I chose to cover the entire map with a American cherry stain to hopefully bring it all together and then make it just a little bit more subdued. If I could redo it, I'd probably opt to keep it one stain, then dry brush the edges of each layer with a darker tone. I think that would make it look a little bit more modern, office furniture-y. So this is before the second stain, and this is after. So I do think the second stain helped a lot. Sanding the edges down allowed, just brought more character, and it looks a little bit more worn and old, which is fitting for HYRULE. Just using images of the map, I went and penciled in all of the roads, and then I just made a mess in my living room and used a Dremel to carve out all the paths and roads in HYRULE. This was a really fun part of the build. So adding the roads, I think really helped tie everything together, but we still have more to do. Every map needs a key, and so I went through multiple designs and iterations. This was the first one that was ultimately too busy, and I ended up settling with this one. So a little bit more simple and balanced, designed it in Photoshop, and then I laser engraved it on a piece of scrap aluminum that my dad had. And so it ended up looking really, really cool. After that, I laser cut all the icons that would be scattered across the map. I was really impressed with how finely I could laser engrave something. It's really impressive. And after gluing the icons on, I cut thin strips of hardwood to use as all the bridges in HYRULE. And so anywhere where there was a bridge, I just cut it to size and glued it on. From there, we started working on the frame, and right now we're planing scrap 2x4s So here it is coming together. We need to install the frame now. So right here, we glued and nailed the runners along where the map would sit, and we'd already stained at this point. We would later stain it multiple times after this to get it darker and darker. And so you can see also making sure to keep the same distance along the lines, and you can see kind of how it fits under there. After we did that, we stained it again just to get a little bit darker. Sanded the edges down after gluing and screwing, and of course I had to stain again on the edges where we sanded. And finally, after the stain was dry a day later, we applied the lacquer finish. The satin finish has dried. It looks great. I'm very happy with it. All that's left is to screw the key into the southwest part of the map. Should be insanely satisfying. I'll play some really satisfying music over this. Finally, after 70 hours of labor and love, the map was almost finished. All we had to do was sign the back. I present the topographical map of Hyrule from The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Really appreciate it. Again, that project was super fun to make, and I hope you would consider subscribing to my channel and liking this video, and I hope you have a great day.